So now I'm going to jump into the Navbar component. So I'm going to go down to Navbar and I'm going to actually put this into my project. I'm going to go to their example and just kind of take a look at what's going on here. So we've got a link here called Navbar that's correlated to this. And then I have a few other links actually coming through. So before I actually jump into having that Navbar, I will just scroll down to the brand with the brand image. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this Navbar right here, and we'll go ahead to where we put that original container. I'm actually going to keep it for now, but right above that div class of container, we're putting our Navbar. So I'm going to paste that in there, save it, and then we're going to go ahead and refresh in here. And we see that I've got Bootstrap in here. That image is not actually coming through. That's because of where this is coming from. So we need to actually give a link to it, which is getbootstrap.com/assets. We refresh, and now I've got that link there, right? So this is a very basic Navbar. It only has the brand or the logo, but it does it in a fluid way. So by default, the Navbars are fluid. Now, can we just put the nav into a container? Let's go ahead and take a look. So if I put it into a container and refresh in here, it does bring it in, but notice the color also comes in. So let's actually change the color. I'm going to go into my documentation here real quick and go to colors and look for a different color. So we've got BG, all of these different colors here. So I'm actually going to use BG, let's say BG info. Okay. So I'm just going to change that color to BG Info so we can really see how this looks. I refresh. Look how easy that was to change that background color. It's actually really, really nice that they've changed it to be like this. Older versions of Bootstraps were just not as easy. So this is cool because it's aligned to everything as we may expected it to be. But what's missing is I actually want this line to go all the way across. I will keep it white on the outside, but I want that line to go literally all the way across. How do I actually go about doing that? So that's where we take the container out of the nav class. So we leave it just like this. So it's just the nav class. It's straight in the body itself. We refresh, it goes back out, but I can go one step further. Is inside of that Navbar container, I can actually add in a container itself, and that brings it right in for me. I can go one step further and say div class equals to row and div class equals to column. I'm doing this intuitively. I actually don't know if it's going to work the way I want it to. So column, of course, is going to be interpreted as column 12, and that's what I'll just leave it as. I refresh and nothing changes, right? So it worked exactly the same. So I actually don't need those row and column at all, right? I can just literally leave it into the container. That container div now holds all of the things that I'm going to be putting inside of my Navbar. The reason I wanted that line to go all the way across has to do with just breaking it down, right? I want it to look nice and fluid no matter where it is. But I do want the logo over here. You may want it differently, right? You may want it to be a fluid site all together, but that's not exactly what I want. So now what we want to do is add in some links. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's jump into Sublime Text, and we're going to add a UL class called Navbar Nav. And inside this UL class, they'll have list elements with a class of nav item. And those nav items, if we want to have an href tag or an anchor tag, which we'll just use a hashtag for now, but we'll put this class in as nav link. And then we'll just say like home, and we can repeat this process for, whatever items we want. So like about or contact or products, whatever you'd like here. So we save that and we jump back in and we see, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. And it doesn't. That's because intuitively you might be like, oh, I'm going to make this list of items and I'm going to put them inside of my Navbar. But we want these items to actually be collapsible when we, actually use the mobile version, right? Because we should be designing for mobile first. Now, this isn't terrible because my brand's right in the middle and it's, it doesn't look that bad. But once you add a bunch of links on it, then it starts to look a lot different. And also, you probably don't want these links stacked when it's big anyway. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this into a new div, and we'll call it class of, this is collapse, and navbar-collapse. And then we're going to give it an ID. So we'll just say nav bar collapse links or items, or some sort of navbar collapsible thing. And we want to put that in our entire UL class. So when we save that and we refresh in here, those link items go away. So we actually need a button to see those link items. And this is going to be button class equals to navbar toggler. And the type is a button. And data toggle equals to collapse. Data target, as in the ID here. We put an ID of navbar collapse links, right? And then we can use the aria expanded equals to false, and aria label. These are some of their defaults. Toggle navigation. We save that. I refresh in here, and there is my items actually showing. Got to finish off that button. They shouldn't be showing. So we put that button there, and then we do span class of navbar toggler icon. And there we go. Okay, refresh in there, and there it is. So if I click on it, notice it's actually showing me those links. This is great, more for mobile, right? So when it's on mobile, this looks awesome. This works exactly as you may expect. But when it's large, we don't want to see that. So how do we actually change that? Well, we can look in the documentation and go into components, into navbar, and we can scroll down a little bit to the example. Ooh, there's this thing called navbar expanded, or navbar expand, and that's probably what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and grab it and add this class to our navbar. And I'm going to say navbar expand medium, or MD. So we refresh in here. What do you know? There's our navigation. When I start to break it down, eventually it goes away. And this MD is the breakpoint as to when it would actually break down. What if I got rid of that MD, navbar expand, and I break it down all the way? It doesn't break down. Cool. So that just means that I have this class for actually breaking down the size of my navbar. But we're not quite done yet. We want to actually have a form. So if we go back into our documentation and kind of just scroll down for the forms here and go ahead and copy just the form. So form class, form inline, and we're just going to go ahead and paste it outside of the collapse. I want to paste it outside of that just to see what happens here. We save that. We refresh in here, and I get this error, right? Or it's not really an error, but it's just not, it just doesn't look that good. So it's actually not really designed to do it this way. So instead, what you're going to do is cut it out and put it inside of that div class. You don't put it into the navbar nav unless you want to, of course, but we put it there, and now it's over here. But I actually want this to be over on the right. So how do we do that? Let's go ahead and try margin right, or actually I think it'd be margin left, and we'll say margin left auto. We refresh there, and what do you know? Now it's over there on the right. So our background color is now not looking great for us. So I'm gonna have to change that. But really, I mean, I just went off of the documentation for this form. I didn't do a whole lot, right? You could customize it as you want, but documentation is really good. It shows you what you need to do. And when you collapse, it works really well. So going back into that nav bar, I want to change the color. If I scroll down a little bit, I see these different color schemes. So I'm going to actually do the nav bar dark with the BG dark, or the background dark. Scroll back up. We've got nav bar light with info. Save it as dark. And I refresh. Oops, not in there, but right here. And there you go. You have the ability to have a much better nav bar than before, and it collapses for us very nicely. The last thing that you might want to do is actually adding in a drop-down menu. So if we go back to the pretty much the top. Actually, go back to the top. You should do that. The drop-down menu is not showing up here, so I'm going to just search for drop-down. Notice it says drop-down link. Here it is. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that itself. And we're going to bring it in to right next to products. And we've got our link here. So we save that, refresh, and there's my drop-down. Right? I didn't have to do a whole lot. I added the list item, and it's a drop-down. And it's got a link here with the drop-down toggle, much like this button was the Navbar toggle. In this case, it's a drop-down toggle. It has the menu ID here, and then just the various drop-down menu items. So you can change it to probably drop-down menu right. I believe that's, nope, that doesn't work. So maybe it's drop-down menu right, like that. There we go. And, or you could do it left, refresh, and it kind of reorganizes the way your drop-down menu actually shows up. And of course, with the drop-downs themselves, you can actually just look at the drop-down component to understand a little bit more about some of these things, right? So drop-down menu going, let's say, for instance, having it go up. Let's take a look, drop up variation. This is it right here. So we've got drop-down menu, and we want it to go up. Drop-down toggle, toggle direction. Really simply, it says drop up instead of drop down on the button. So right here, it says drop down. We call that drop up. It's going to be kind of weird for the nav bar to drop up. So it actually doesn't allow that to happen. But the angle of the drop down button does show that angle. There might be some more things to it than there's that, but you can play around with it. That's just another component, right? It's just using some of the code that they already have that we don't really need to change a whole lot. So we now have our nav bar. It's really, really looking like a website. Of course, there's customizations that we'd still want to do, but this is actually pretty solid in of itself. Now, of course, I no longer need this search bar here because I have it here, but you know, it's good to know that you can do all sorts of things here. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.